Okay, we are starting a new series. This is not going to be a very long one, but for the sake of some things that will be occurring, I'm not going to start on a long study, but it'll be more than one Sunday. I can guarantee you that. It may take the month or maybe a little more, and then we will begin a textual study. But this is something that needs to be discussed periodically. Now, we have done this before, but it's been years since it's been done. Many years. And like I said, it needs to be brought up periodically. There are people who do not believe, they may believe in God, but they do not believe we can know who God is or that the Bible is the Word of God. They don't believe that, nor do they believe that the Quran is the Word of God or anything else is the Word of God, that there is a Creator, but we cannot know who He is, and He has not given us any word as to who He is or anything else for that matter. That is called a deist. A deist believes in God. He just denies that deity has revealed Himself to us. Thomas Paine would be a rather famous one. Thomas Paine lived in the 1700s and into the 1800s, and he was someone involved, a British citizen, but involved in the American Revolution. He also went over and was part of the French Revolution, where he almost died because here in the American Revolution, no one was executing people wholesale as they did later in France, and he almost died there. But Thomas Paine wrote books, and he shows himself to, well, actually he's giving his arguments for deism, that there is a God, but you cannot know who that God is. Well, if there is a God, could He possibly communicate to mankind? Let's just think of this as a hypothetical. If the God who created all of this around us, would that God be able to communicate to His creation? I think we would have to say, obviously, He can. If He can create us, He can communicate with us. He can create us to where we can understand His communications. All right? So if God, let's just continue with this hypothetical. If God could communicate with us, what if He did decide to do that? Would He not want to prove that communication must be from Him? Because anyone can say, I speak for God, and this is what God has to say. Anybody can do that. A 3-year-old can do that. Anyone has the ability to be a false prophet and start lying about some message concerning God, that they didn't receive that message. Now, God would have to prove that the message is from Him. So we continue with this hypothetical. If there's a God, surely He's able to communicate with His creation. And if He communicated with His creation, He would have to prove it's from Him. So the next thing would be, how would He prove it? How could He prove that the communication is in fact from Him? Well, there's a very simple way. I mean, we can't do it, but God can do it, and that is through prophecy, of knowing things that no one else could possibly know. Okay, let's go first off to that of the distant past. Then we're going to talk about things that the Bible knew concerning the distant future. And in every case that we're going to be bringing up this morning, or in any of this, is going to be not minor things that occurred upon the earth, but enormous things that happened upon the earth, of which no one can really deny, not rationally anyway, not give a sound argument and say that that could not or did not happen. These are very large world events. Now, first off, we must understand that, and we're going with the distant past now, with the distant past, where there are no witnesses but God, where there are no witnesses but God, what if God told us what occurred, such as in the 6 days of creation? It's not until the 6th day of creation that we would have some other witness, that would be Adam and Eve, that could be there until we get to that 6th day. But we have the 6 days of creation. Okay, what if God told us how that was done and what happened? What if He told us that bit by bit, day by day, through day 1 to day 6, that God created, and each day featured something different, such as day 4 was sun, moon, and stars. Day 5 was all flying creatures and all watery creatures. And then day 6, land animals and mankind, Adam and Eve. What if He said that? Okay. Now, what if the Bible, from being written, the book of Genesis rather, let's just go with the book of Genesis. What if the book of Genesis, written at about 1300 BC, 1300 BC, written there by a man named Moses, who was raised 40 years, first 40 years of his life, he's raised in Egypt. Next 40 years of his life, he's a shepherd in exile. And the last 40 years, he is the one who is the deliverer, bringing Israel out of Egypt. Okay, there's the author of Genesis. And he begins Genesis, and his first, he writes the first 5 books of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then bit by bit, he's going to tell us, and it is God communicating this, how everything was created. And since those words were penned, and we have very ancient copies of these, regardless of what men have said through the ages, whatever generation, including our own generation, no matter what men may have said, and the Bible has had opponent after opponent after opponent going back through the millennium. Definitely. Regardless of what man said, the Bible never backed up and said, let's change this. Genesis 1 never was altered. Not once. It still stands precisely as it was when in its ancient form. Precisely as it was. Now, we have it translated into English for us, but if you wanted to, you could learn Hebrew and you could go read it in Hebrew. You could do that. Now, never ever had to make revisions, never ever had to say, oops, we were unaware of that, let's make a little bit of correction. Never. Now here's the next thing, is that true science, and I'm not talking about the fraudulent stuff, as you know, there's some people who have it in their heads that scientists somehow never lie. Okay, well, I can tell you right now, every scientist is a human being and they can lie. And that no scientist would ever say something that wasn't true. Yes, I can tell you right now, they most certainly would. They most certainly would, especially if pressured. But regardless of the pressure, Genesis 1 and 2 never changed. But where in real world evidence, and I mean real world evidence, does it suggest that Genesis 1 and 2 could not have occurred as stated. Were there any witnesses? No, none except God. Can it be recreated? Nope, never has. Never has been recreated. And so it can't be seen. All we can do is speculate at best. But what if we have God's word on it, that this is the way it happened? And what if also nature told us, nature itself told us, matter cannot create itself, so that there cannot be. And if matter can't create itself, energy can't create itself either. If there's a void, it remains a void forever. Because if it's waiting for matter and energy or anything else to spring into action, to spring into being, it's not going to happen. It won't happen. And so realistically, those who talk about the Big Bang are talking about a miracle. And those who are talking about life suddenly appearing on the earth are talking about another miracle. And every kind of development that goes from the single cellular organisms all the way up to humanity would be a countless list of miracles, of where nature would say that's impossible from the beginning to the end. And the Bible never, ever backed up. Now, let's continue. Matter of fact, let's go into things that the Bible knew centuries beforehand. And it got it right. Now, before anyone decides that somehow these things can be faked, let me tell you that what we're about to look at can't be faked, because we have not only original texts going back 250 BC, and what we're going to be discussing occurred well after 250 BC, well after, and that we also have a Greek translation of the Old Testament at 250 BC. These things were already written, copied, and even translated before these events even occurred, and it can't be faked. Now, how can we know the Bible is the Word of God? Does God not provide some kind of evidence in the text that allows us to understand full well this must be from, there's got to be a supernatural explanation to it. And the supernatural explanation is that the message is directly from God, who knows the future, knows the past, knows everything. But we're going to be looking at the power of prophecy. And in this, we just began. When it comes to prophecy, and we've said this before, the Bible is not shy about it. The Bible is going to be quite courageous and quite forthright and bold, and there's not going to be anything uncertain about it. Sometimes it's going to be extraordinarily specific, especially when you begin to see this prophecy written in this book, and here's talking about the same thing over here, and we put those together, and we've got a little more of a specific, and then more things added, and bring those in together, and we begin to see a greater picture. And all of which are given centuries before the events. And when the events actually occur, we see every one of those prophecies written by different prophets in different times, all of them had to have been from God, because we see the prophecy actually happening. And it includes everything those prophets in the past spoke of. It speaks of them, so that God is telling us this is His Word. I'm going to stop just for a second. Just because someone doesn't believe does not mean they haven't been told, and does not mean that they have in fact seen the evidence but still don't want to believe. They're motivated by wanting to live the way they want to live, as we can see the Bible speaking about that. They don't want to believe simply because they don't want the laws of God on them. They don't want any kind of moral code. They don't want any kind of idea of being personally judged at the end of time. They don't like the idea of a overwhelmingly powerful God throwing the wicked into hell, especially since the things they want to do will put you in hell. Now that is an emotional response of where I don't want to see the evidence. I don't want to see any more evidence. I want to refuse what has been shown to me. I don't want to believe that because I don't want to fall in line under deity. I don't want to do that. Now, the Bible knows way too much, and we're going to actually put this to the test. Concerning the Christ, all right, there are no more prophecies on any other subject. Let me rephrase this. The prophecies of Christ are more numerous than any other prophecies. The prophecies of Christ are the greatest of the prophecies. There's nothing that has more prophecies than the Christ. While there are prophecies of other things, and we can look at the prophecy of other things and not realize that also incorporates the Christ, such as Daniel chapter 2, vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, which we'll see in a little bit. That vision is not just about world history that hasn't even occurred yet, world events that hadn't occurred in his day, but it also has to do with the coming of the Christ and the coming of His church, the establishing of His kingdom. And now, we just go to this. If they're prophecies of the Christ, how broad are they? How narrow are they? How specific are they? If you've ever read, and if you want to just do it for the sake of doing it, the Writings of Nostradamus. All right, he was supposed to have been this man that could foresee the distant future by looking into a bowl of water. And there's actually a word for divination by staring into a bowl of water. I have forgotten what that word is. Don't quite use it all the time. Matter of fact, I don't use it. But that is what he would do, and he supposedly would look into this bowl of water and then would be able to see the future, and he would write these things out. And if you've ever read any of his, I think they're quatrains, anyway, they're put in kind of poetic form. If you've ever read those, you would see that this is so non-specific that it could mean anything. It could mean absolutely anything. It'd be like, I'm just going to make something up, that the eagle flew over the mountain and saw the river below. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you could say, all right, in our age, eagle stands for the U.S. and the U.S. and the river, and you just start figuring it out. But in earlier times, in his day, eagle wouldn't have meant the U.S. at all because it didn't exist. It would have meant somebody else would have just made it into something else. And they are not specific. Matter of fact, they are just really nonsensical sort of things that have no meaning whatsoever and predict nothing. They predict nothing. The Bible, however, is remarkably specific, and it occurred. And there are certain things that we find in the Old Testament that when they were written, one may not have even known that that was a prophecy. But they're quite specific. And we've done this not too long ago. Let's go to the book of Zechariah. Let's go to the book of Zechariah. And most assuredly, someone could have read this in the days of Zechariah and have no idea what it means, or even that it's a prophecy. And here's the way the Bible can work. Some things it's obvious that it's a prophecy. There are some things it's obvious. But there are other times when it's giving things and just kind of puts something in there, and then later we see this occurred. I know precisely so Zechariah chapter 11, I'm sorry if I didn't say that, beginning in verse 12. So Zechariah chapter 11, beginning in 12, we see something that the reader in Zechariah's day, or even 100 years after Zechariah, could not have known what this meant. But we do, because we have things given to us showing the fulfillment of this, and that this is prophecy, and we can understand it absolutely. So Zechariah 11, verse 12. Then I said to them, if it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. Now that might hit a bell right there. 30 pieces of silver. What is this? Okay, so then I said to them, I'm reading it again, if it is agreeable to you. So this is someone making a business deal. If it's agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. This is someone saying, I'll do it for this amount. If you don't want to pay me, okay, then don't pay me. Then that's okay too. But if you want this done, it's going to be 30 pieces of silver. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, I'm going to read it the way it ought to be read, and Jehovah said to me, quote from Jehovah, throw it to the potter. And I'm continuing the quote, that princely price they set on me. That would be the end of that quote from Jehovah. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. What does that mean? Well, we know what it means. 30 pieces of silver, a price set on Jehovah, a price set on God, and we're going to throw it into the house of Jehovah, throw it into the house of the Lord, that's the temple, throw it into the temple for the potter. Okay? From the standpoint of someone reading this in Zechariah's day, what does it mean? They couldn't really know. It would be a matter of guesswork. But now we do know, because we have things hidden in plain sight. And once we get into the New Testament, once we get into later Revelation, then we see, oh, so that's what that meant. That has been there. I have read that. Now I know precisely what that means. And of course, it has to do with Judas and his betrayal of Christ. 30 pieces of silver. That was the arrangement that was made. And he regrets it, tries to give the money back. Well, they don't want the money back. That's blood money. And he just throws it down right there in the temple. He throws it down. And what happens to that money? It goes to buy the potter's field, because they've got to do something with the money, but it's blood money. What are they going to do? So we're going to buy the potter's field. What's the reason for that? Well, it's for people that come into Jerusalem. They're strangers. They pass away here, which is something that happens, and we have a place to bury them. All right? So if you're buying the potter's field, guess where the 30 pieces of silver went? It went to the potter who owned the field. That's where it went. Now, this is just one minor thing in what's actually major, but it's just one part of proving the Bible is from God. There's no natural explanation, and it cannot be faked. It can't be. But let's go on. As someone may say, yes, but the New Testament was written considerably later, and someone could have just put that whole thing in to match up with Zechariah. For whatever reason, just put the whole business concerning Judas in this myth concerning Jesus of Nazareth. They can most certainly have done that, and then someone like me can come along later and say, look, it was there all along, it's from God. Well, let's look at other things that it doesn't matter if you write the New Testament or later books or not. It doesn't matter what you do. These things occurred in world history and have nothing to do with someone in a later book of the Bible saying, well, these things occurred. In case you didn't know, these things occurred because it's a matter of world history. But let's continue on. If the prophecies speak of a time when the Christ, because we're going to now focus just on the Christ. If the prophecies speak of a time when the Christ would be born and fulfill his duties, how specific does it get? Because one may be familiar with a couple of verses, a couple of prophecies, and say, that's not very specific. This could happen almost any time, or never ever happen, but always seem to, it's yet to be in the future. Well, if you began looking at more prophecies and begin putting them together, we will see when he was supposed to be born and when he was going to be fulfilling his duty. We will see that. And the Bible is going to present, we'll see it in just a second, world history. This is the size of world history. How big of a window does the Bible make for when the Christ would be on this earth doing his duty? Because if the window is as big as world history, then that's a very sizable window. All right, that's not getting very specific. But what if that window of time is 1 year? What about that? Well, we're going to look at this. And we come to this, how small or how large is this prophetic window of time, and did the Christ arrive inside it? And I will say right now that yes, the Bible does give a specific window in time when the Christ would arrive. And I will also say this in it, that if the Christ did not arrive in that time, he's not arriving ever. He's not arriving at all and will never arrive. The whole thing was a fraud, and you can throw the Bible away. But what if he did? What if the Bible spoke of a specific narrow window in time and there he was? What about that? Are you willing to take a little bit of time and let's discover this? Take a little bit of time, because it would behoove anyone, it would benefit anyone to understand the depth and the dimensions of biblical prophecy. And yes, some prophecies are more difficult to understand than others, just like we just read in Zechariah 11. You couldn't really understand that as a prophetic saying until it occurred, and then you see, oh, yeah, well, there it is. There it in fact was fulfilled. But Acts chapter 5, beginning in verse 35. And he said to them, men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men. Now this is Gamaliel, and he's talking to the Sanhedrin court, and he's talking about the apostles. He's talking about them. Okay, men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up. Well, who's Theudas? Don't know. Haven't the foggiest idea, except that Gamaliel and those other men knew who it was. But notice, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody. A number of men, about 400, joined him. He was slain, and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. So, in the context of this discussion, in the context of what he's talking about concerning take heed to yourselves what you do regarding these men, this concerns the Christ. And he said, well, there was another man claiming to be something, probably claiming to be the Christ, named Theudas. And what happened to him? Well, he had a following. Theudas was slain, and everybody that followed him they were scattered. And what do we know of Theudas today? Nothing except what Gamaliel said. Nothing. He said it came to nothing. And evidently it did. Then he said, verse 37, after this, Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of the census and drew away many people after him. He also perished, and all who obeyed were dispersed. So here is another man who claimed to be something, probably the Christ. Here is this Judas of Galilee, and this would be something that they would either remember, and it was in their lifetime, or perhaps knew about just coming through it would have been relatively recent events, but they would know, yeah, it was dispersed. So what do we know about the followers of Theudas? You could say Gamaliel is saying. What about the followers of Theudas? What happened? His doctrine isn't around anymore. Nobody cares a thing about him anymore. Judas of Galilee, same thing. Followers are gone, dispersed, not even spoken of anymore except here. But then he says, and also we want to make note that he is going to tell them in Acts chapter 5, and I'm going to go there because I thought that my next frame would continue on with what he had to say. But he's going to say, verse 38, and now I say to you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this work is of men, it'll come to nothing. Nothing. Just like Theudas and Judas of Galilee. It's going to come to nothing. So you don't have to worry about it. They will disperse. They will just the whole thing will vanish. 39. But, and this shows the thinking of Gamaliel, that he allowed for the possibility that all this was from God. But if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest you even be found to fight against God. And they agreed with him. Now, if they agreed with him, then they would have to allow this could be from God. They would have to allow it. Now, if it's from men, it's going to come to nothing. If it's from God, you better leave it alone. You better leave it alone, or you're going to fight against God. And not a position you want to be in, but that's the position they took and would continue to take. I don't know about Gamaliel, but the Sanhedrin court would continue to take that position against God. But here is this sense that Gamaliel didn't just say, yeah, this is all from man and it's going to come to nothing. Just release them into the wild. It's going to amount to nothing. He gives the distinct possibility that this can be from God. And no one argued with him that this could not be from God. No one argued with him. Now, why am I bringing this up? First off, in showing that there were false Christs before and after Jesus of Nazareth. False Christs. And they came to absolutely nothing. And why would there have been false Christs? Because the prophecies concerning Christ or all throughout the New Testament. I mean, all throughout the Old Testament. They're throughout, and you'd have someone who decides to take advantage of that. Someone who just decides that's what he or she wants to fool others, or maybe themselves. They're mad and they say that they are the Christ. But let's go now, and this all has to do with the timeline. Matthew chapter 24, beginning of verse 23. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it. That's Jesus saying that. Why is he saying it? Because he's saying there will be false Christs. There will be. Now, that's another prophecy, by the way. And he's talking about there will be people who will claim, through time, that will claim to be the Christ. Now, that is provable even to this day. Provable of people who have, even now, worshiping someone they have called the Christ that's not Jesus of Nazareth, and someone who claims to be the Christ that's obviously not Jesus of Nazareth, making that claim. Now, let's think of other important people through history. All right, let's just, someone from our own time of Benjamin Franklin saying, there will be people that will say, I am Benjamin Franklin, the inventor of this, that, and the other, and diplomat and all that. But don't you believe it? He never said that. And that would be insane for him to say that. But Jesus knows there will be people claiming to be the Christ. Now, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Has this happened through time? Well, I think you can answer that as yes. And to this day, the answer can be seen around us. Yes, there are people like this. False Christs, false prophets, trying to show these great signs and wonders to deceive. Was it last week? I think it was. We were talking about people pretending to heal. And I don't mean doctors. Doctors not trying to pretend. I hope they're not trying to pretend. I'm talking about faith healers, supposed faith healers that say they have the power of God and they can heal people miraculously. Are they of this category? Signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect? Yep. So Jesus is talking about there would be false Christs that would come through the centuries, and also others, false prophets, that they would try to show these signs and wonders to deceive. But bringing it now to our lesson is that there was, if this could be the case, that you couldn't know who was the Christ, then there'd be an awful lot of confusion. But what if the Bible made it very specific in time to where we can know the one who hit it at this time in history would have to be the one. Not before, not after, but hit it at this particular point in time, he has got to be the one. And if he's not the one, then we'd have to ask, who came in that point in time? And if the Christ didn't come at that point in time, once again, specified by the Bible, then the Bible is wrong all the way around. So, Galatians 4 through 5, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Notice, it says in the fullness of time, that there was a time in which the Christ would come. Did the Old Testament prophecies ever speak of that? Yes, they did. Now, not every one of them, because not every one of them had anything to do with the time in which he was going to be. It could be something concerning what he would accomplish, or how the leaders of Israel and the leaders of the Gentiles would respond to him, or how he would be mistreated, or where he would be born. Not necessarily the when, but the where but there is also the when. The when in this. And it's in the fullness of time, now in Romans 5:6, in due time. For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. It was due time. As the other verse states, the fullness of time, due time, they mean the same thing, precisely on time. Precisely as prophesied. Now, when sin entered the world, and it's from Adam and Eve, and their disobedience to God in the garden, sin must have a solution. And there is the promise, Genesis 3:15, there is the promise that there would be a solution. But it doesn't say when that would be, but it does say the seed of woman. That someone, a woman, is going to give birth, and that he, and it is that one is referred to as a he. He is going to take care of sin. Now, it doesn't give us when that was going to happen. It could be that Eve herself is going to give birth to the Christ. It could be that. But there is a fullness of time. She's not going to be the mother. That's going to be someone way down the line who's one of her billions of daughters, one way down the line. And that it's going to be in due time it happens. And that is going to be working in the background of human history. God is going to be working through the events on the earth, through human history, to bring this about. And so we come to our timeline. And in our timeline, we're just going to call this human history. And it's the timeline on the earth. Now, humanity goes beyond this timeline. All right, this is just on the earth. Humanity actually will continue on an infinite line this direction into the future. There is no end to the existence of humanity. We will be either in heaven. Humanity will be in either in heaven or in hell, and that's eternally. But this is human history. This is the timeline of the earth. And so just to put a little bit of perspective on it, we have Abraham, Moses, David. We're just putting them on the timeline. And then we will call this today. Now, I've put a question mark. You probably can't see that question mark. But I've put this question mark today because I don't want you to think that I know when the world will end, because I don't know. I've just had to put it somewhere. Now, the end may be right there. The arrow may be pointing to it. But this is where we are today on our little imaginary timeline. All right, the Christ had to arrive on this earth at a specific time to fulfill prophecy. He had to. And how specific is the Bible? Well, we begin in Daniel chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar is going to have a dream, and it's a vision of a world timeline around 4 empires. Now, this does not give the entire history of the earth. That's not what it does. What it does is start with where Nebuchadnezzar is, his current day, and takes us to the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, that God would set up a kingdom. And it goes through empires, from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, to the Greek Empire, to the Roman Empire. And in the days of these kings, that's the Roman Empire, God would set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. That is the message that's here. Now, I want us to understand that Nebuchadnezzar's vision does not say these are the only empires that will ever exist upon the earth. It doesn't say that. And I wouldn't even have said that last sentence, except that I've heard it. And I've heard it from members of the church. It doesn't say there will be no more empires. And it doesn't have to say anything about empires. It's except to take us through major world events to where we get to the church, where we get to God's kingdom here on the earth. That's what it takes us to. And once we get to that in the vision, it doesn't concern itself with all the empires or the kingdoms that may exist for the rest of time, or the rest of time on the earth that come and go. It doesn't concern itself with that at all. Now, just want to bring us to this. Nebuchadnezzar's dream really is going to take us from the Babylonian Empire, Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and to the fall of Rome. That's where it's going to take us. And this particular window of time is 1,088 years, going from the Babylonian Empire to the fall of the Roman Empire. And it's 1,088 years. And given the expanse of human history, if Christ comes somewhere in 1,088 years, that's pretty good. It's going to get a lot more tighter. It's going to get narrower in this, but that's just the beginning of it. And okay, so actually, while this concerns 1,088 years, it's going to make mention that it's under the Roman Empire that the kingdom would be established, under the Roman Empire in the days of those kings. All right, we need to stop for this morning. I appreciate everybody being with us, and we will continue this. Thank you, everyone.